Hey, crime connoisseurs. If you're like me, you love diving into a good book. I especially love finding a book about cases we cover. But sometimes it's hard to find the time to sit and read. We live in an on-the-go society. Thankfully, Audible makes it easy to instantly access the books we love without sacrificing our time. With over 180,000 audiobooks and more, you will undoubtedly find one that will grip you and leave you not wanting to pull away while still being able to do other things. You can get a free 30-day trial membership by going to audibletrial.com/ccpod to start listening to your favorite books. That's audibletrial.com/ccpod for your free 30-day trial membership. Welcome back, crime connoisseurs. I'm your host, Grace D. Today, we're picking up where we left off last with Skidmore, a town of shadows and secrets. So if you haven't listened to part 1, stop now and go give it a listen. If you're still here, that means you're back and ready for part 2. So let's recap, shall we? We learned about Ken Rex McElroy and the reign of terror he put on a small town in Skidmore, Missouri. McElroy was a man who had charges brought against him ranging from theft, harassment, intimidation, assault, to attempted murder, just to name a few. McElroy was found not guilty time and time again until he met his match with B&B grocery store owner Bo Bowenkamp. Now remember, McElroy had shot Bowenkamp in the neck and left him for dead after a misunderstanding happened with some of the McElroy children. Miraculously, Bowenkamp survived, and like the stubborn old man that he was, testified against McElroy at trial, where he was found guilty for the first time. However, McElroy was sentenced to just 2 years in prison, given the Missouri law at the time, and his attorney, Richard Gene McFadden, filed for an appeal. The judge released McElroy on bond until the appeal hearing. McElroy then went to the town's bar, D&G Tavern, where he brought an M1 assault rifle with a bayonet attached to it, made threats against Bowenkamp, and demonstrated with the weapon how he would quote-unquote handle Bo. 3 men in the tavern decided that they would sign affidavits for the prosecution and testify to this incident since it clearly violated the terms of his bail. On July 10, 1981, on the day of the bail hearing, a large group of men went to the courthouse to support the 3 men testifying, only to find out that it had been postponed until July 20th due to scheduling conflicts. A group of men went to the Legion Hall, where there was an impromptu town meeting with Sheriff Danny Estes about what could be done to protect the town from McElroy's wrath. It was suggested that they form a neighborhood watch, and while the group was at the Legion Hall, word got to them that McElroy had shown up at D&G Tavern. Sheriff Estes told the men not to confront McElroy when they went there. McElroy sat at the bar with his wife Trina, and a large crowd gathered around them inside the bar. He purchased a 6-pack to go, and then he and Trina returned to the truck. After they got into the truck, McElroy placed a cigarette between his lips, and before he could light it, shots rang out, and McElroy was dead. Trina continuously stated that Del Clement, one of the co-owners of D&G Tavern, was one of the shooters from behind. She told this to law enforcement, grand juries, the media, and anyone who would listen. However, the townspeople of Skidmore all told another story. Or should I say, didn't tell. Law enforcement interviewed 35 people, and no one would admit to seeing or hearing anything. Nearly 44 years later, the murder of Ken Rex McElroy is still unsolved. Most of the people who were prominent in the case before have since passed, and no one has made a deathbed confession. If there are people still alive that know who's responsible for the death of McElroy, they're not dropping names. This leads us to today's case. At what cost did the people and small town of Skidmore pay for their silence in the bloodshed of the town bully? Since the death of Ken McElroy, there have been 3 other significantly tragic events that have plagued this extremely small town. And the kicker? The 3 victims were all related. Like always, with each person, we're going to start from their beginning. This is part 2 of Skidmore, a town of shadows and secrets. In 2000, 2001, and 2004, the same family living in the small town of Skidmore, Missouri, experienced 3 separate tragedies, 2 murders and 1 disappearance. How can one family face so much tragedy? To better understand the family's dynamics, let's begin by going over a brief family tree. The family narrative starts with the marriage of Joanne Hoffman and Asaph D. Babe Stinnett in 1965. Joanne was already a mother to several children at the time of their marriage, while Babe, who was a widower, had his own kids from the previous relationship. When they decided to blend their families, they combined their existing children with the new ones that they had together, ultimately forming a large family with 9 children. Among these 9 children was Sandra, who went on to have a daughter named Wendy Gillenwater. This expansion of the family tree sets the stage for understanding the complex relationships and connections within their lineage. On January 8, 1975, in Fairfax, Missouri, Wendy Naoko Gillenwater was born to Randy and Sandra Gillenwater. She was known for her kind heart and vibrant personality. Wendy had a close-knit family and many friends who adored her. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Skidmore began battling a problem much more challenging to deal with than a town bully: meth. Meth is a highly addictive drug that is cheap and easy to make. People can buy what they need at a local Walmart, and rural Missouri led the county in home meth labs in the 2010s. Wendy Gillenwater became addicted to methamphetamines in her early 20s alongside her boyfriend, Greg Dragoo. The two moved in together in their late teens in 1994. By October 2000, the two were still together, but things were really bad. Dragoo was physically abusive, often due to his meth use. Meth is a stimulant, and while some people feel euphoric, some become anxious and irritable. It can also heighten the fight or flight reaction, making people more likely to overreact to relatively minor issues. And some people can also experience psychosis. Dragoo was someone who dealt with the so-called ice rage when he was high. Wendy was the target, and he often chose to vent his anger. In addition to the physical violence in the relationship, Dragoo was extremely controlling. His paranoia escalated right alongside his meth use. He didn't ever want Wendy to leave the house without him. He isolated her from her family. If Dragoo left Wendy home alone, he would sometimes take her shoes with him, or even her clothes, so she couldn't go anywhere. It can be challenging to understand why someone might find it difficult to leave an abusive relationship. Many people think, how can a person truly love someone who treats them in such a harmful way? While it may be hard to comprehend, this situation occurs more often than we realize. The abuser will make threats to harm the family pet or the children to keep control of the situation and prevent the victim from leaving. Or they'll even go as far as threatening to harm themselves to make the victim feel guilty for leaving, as if you leave, I will end my life and it will be all your fault. On average, it takes a victim of abuse about 7 attempts before they finally leave their abuser. And unfortunately, the violence often escalates each time after each attempt. In Wendy's case, there are additional factors to consider, such as her struggle with inactive addiction, her lack of financial resources, and the fact that they were living in poverty with little to no access to assistance. The nearest city with resources was an hour away, and Wendy could barely get away from Dragoo long enough to see her family. On October 16, 2000, 26-year-old Greg Dragoo experienced an explosive outburst of rage for reasons that remain a mystery. He may not even understand the source of his anger himself. At the time, he was under the influence of methamphetamine, which likely fueled his violent behavior. The attack on Wendy started unexpectedly, and although the exact duration of the assault is unclear, it ended when Dragoo dragged Wendy, now rendered unconscious, into the backyard around 1:30 p.m. A vigilant neighbor who witnessed the horrifying scene unfold immediately rushed outside to intervene. Recognizing the severity of the situation, he quickly dialed 911 to report the assault. It was only when Dragoo became aware of the neighbor's presence that he finally stopped the brutal attack. Afterward, Dragoo casually walked around to the front of the house and sat on the steps, seemingly unfazed as he awaited the arrival of law enforcement. Meanwhile, the paramedics who arrived on scene found Wendy in a state of clinical death. They immediately performed CPR and provided artificial respiration to stabilize her condition before transporting her to the hospital. Despite the efforts of the paramedics to resuscitate her, Wendy never regained consciousness or the ability to breathe on her own. She was pronounced dead around 5:15 p.m. that evening at the hospital, devastating her family and friends. Following her death, the charges against Greg Dragoo were escalated from assault to homicide. An autopsy revealed extensive injuries on Wendy's body, indicating a history of abuse. The medical examiner found both old and new wounds. The cause of death was confirmed as blunt force trauma to the chest and abdomen. When interrogated by detectives, Dragoo confessed to the heinous act, detailing his role in Wendy's assault. Consequently, he was charged with murder. Despite the incriminating confession, and a neighbor prepared to testify that it was indeed Greg Dragoo who had forcibly pulled Wendy out of the house to continue the assault, the case initially appeared to be heading toward trial. Reports from that period suggest that Dragoo was considering pursuing a partial defense, indicating a complex legal strategy in the wake of his violent actions. In Missouri, a jury is allowed to consider convicting a defendant on lesser charges. Unlike some states where there can be disputes between attorneys about which charges are included in jury instructions, Missouri consistently explains lesser included offenses to the jury. This means that even if the state charges someone with first-degree murder and presents that case, the jury can convict the defendant of any homicide charge. A partial defense virtually means that the defendant acknowledges guilt but argues that they are not guilty of the most serious charge. In this instance, Dragoo was charged with second-degree murder, and his defense could present a case to the jury for a conviction of voluntary manslaughter instead. The situation can mean the difference between decades in prison. Dragoo underwent psychiatric evaluations, which revealed a severe substance abuse problem and history of significant childhood abuse. Ultimately, he chose to plead guilty to a second-degree murder charge in August 2001, just before his trial was scheduled to begin. Wendy's family felt relieved to avoid the trial and the painful details of what she had endured. Hearing the medical examiner describe her injuries would have been excruciating. At Dragoo's sentencing hearing, Wendy's sister said in her victim impact statement, quote, "I have been sentenced to a life without my sister. I didn't have a say in this matter, and I didn't have a choice. But Greg Dragoo has his life, his family, and he had his choice." End quote. The judge recognized that Dragoo had been a victim for most of his life, having endured his own experience of abuse and trauma. He expressed sympathy for the challenges that Dragoo faced that led him to his current situation. The judge also highlighted the impact that drugs had on their relationship. However, he ultimately concluded that due to the ongoing pattern of abuse Dragoo inflicted on Wendy, he deserved a life sentence in prison. Greg Dragoo is still incarcerated. He appealed his conviction in 2004, but appealing after taking a plea can be challenging because there are usually no trial errors to cite as grounds for an appeal. In Missouri, individuals who have pleaded guilty can contest their conviction based on ineffective assistance of counsel. They can also appeal their sentence if it exceeds the maximum allowed. However, second-degree murder is classified as a Class A felony, and the maximum sentence for this offense is life in prison, which is what Dragoo received. His appeal was denied. In Missouri, a life sentence for second-degree murder typically allows for parole eligibility after 30 years. Dragoo has already served 23 years of that sentence, which means he may be eligible for parole within the next decade. Since Wendy's death, her family has become advocates for domestic violence resources in rural areas. In the 10 months between the tragic murder of Wendy and Dragoo's guilty plea, the Stinnett family endured yet another heart-wrenching tragedy. Among the blended family of Joanne and Babe, which consisted of 9 children, was Bob Perry. Bob had a son named Branson, who was 6 years younger than his cousin Wendy. Branson Kane Perry was born on February 24, 1981. He grew up in the small town of Skidmore, nestled in the heart of Missouri, surrounded by a loving family consisting of his parents Bob and Becky and a brother who was 3 years younger. The Perry household was known for its vibrant and welcoming atmosphere. According to a childhood friend of Branson's, featured in the docuseries No One Saw a Thing, the Perry home was the favored gathering spot for local children. Bob and Becky intentionally created a fun and inviting environment, making it a beloved hangout where laughter and friendship flourished among the neighborhood kids. Bob built an expansive playground set because he and Becky believed that if the kids were at their house playing, they would know where their kids were and that they were safe. It was a clever plan. Bob and Becky owned and operated a greenhouse business together, and everyone had positive things to say about them. They were a highly respected family, known for their integrity and successful business ventures, and they raised 2 polite and well-loved sons. Branson was deeply passionate about martial arts, particularly Hapkido. Hapkido is a Korean martial art that emphasizes joint locks, throws, and strikes. He dedicated years to his practice and achieved the esteemed rank of black belt, a testament to his commitment and skill. Branson graduated high school from Nottoway Holt High School in 1999. After graduating, he had hopes of serving his country by enlisting in the Army. Unfortunately, he did not pass his physical exam. Concerned, he sought medical advice from his doctor, who diagnosed him with tachycardia, a condition characterized by an abnormally fast heart rate. This revelation altered the trajectory of his plans and required him to rethink his future ambitions. Uncover the secrets of your dog's DNA with Wisdom Panel, the world's leading canine genetics test. With a simple cheek swab, Wisdom Panel can reveal your dog's breed, ancestry, health traits, and so much more. Understanding your dog's genetic background can help you provide the best care possible. Whether it's identifying potential health risks, understanding their behavior, or simply satisfying your curiosity about your dog's unique heritage, Wisdom Panel delivers the insights you need. Their state-of-the-art technology analyzes over 350 breeds, types, and varieties, and screens for over 200 genetic health conditions. Plus, their easy-to-understand reports make it simple to learn about your dog's genetics. Join the millions of pet parents discovering their dog's story with Wisdom Panel. Order your kit today and start exploring your dog's DNA. Because every dog has a tale, and Wisdom Panel helps you tell it. Go to wisdompanel.pxf.io/ccpod to learn more about your four-legged friend. That's wisdompanel.pxf.io/ccpod. Branson's medical condition led to a troubling symptom. His heart rate would race uncontrollably, often disproportionately, to the level of physical exertion or activity that he was engaged in at the time. Despite the seriousness of this issue, it appears that he was not placed on any medication to manage it. However, the condition was significant enough to disqualify him from serving in the military, which had been one of his dreams. Following the disqualification, Branson got a job as a roofer, a physically demanding job that required resilience and skill. Unfortunately, after a period of working in this role, he was laid off due to economic downturns that affected the construction industry. Finding steady work after proved to be a tough challenge, particularly in the rural community where he lived. Opportunities were scarce, and the job market was limited in such areas, making it difficult for someone in his position to secure stable employment. In 2000, Branson's family underwent a significant change when his parents, Bob and Becky, divorced. By then, Branson had already completed his education and opted to remain in Skidmore with his father, Bob. Meanwhile, his mother, Becky, and Branson's younger brother, who was only 16 at the time, relocated approximately 20 miles away, further complicating family dynamics and support systems. The divorce between Bob and Becky unfolded with a surprising degree of grace, a rarity in the often tumultuous landscape of family separations. Bob took the initiative to help Becky with her move, carefully packing boxes filled with shared memories, from family photos to beloved toys that held sentimental value for the two boys. This thoughtful gesture helped maintain an atmosphere of cooperation, allowing their boys to experience a smooth transition between homes, even as their world altered around them. On Friday, April 13, 2001, Branson's grandmother, Joanne, felt a strong urge to visit the house. Concerned for her grandson during this turbulent time, she arrived in the afternoon, hoping to ensure he was coping well with the recent changes. Bob had been recovering in the hospital for several days due to an ongoing health issue. Despite the circumstances, Branson had shown remarkable dedication, visiting his father often. However, during Joanne's visit with Bob on Thursday, the day before, he expressed concern that Branson had not come by on Wednesday evening, the 11th, as anticipated. During their conversation, Bob also revealed that he had been scheduled for discharge from the hospital that Friday. However, the doctors had opted to keep him for a few more additional days to monitor his condition more closely. Joanne went to the house to check on Branson and to inform him that his dad would not be coming home that day. When Joanne arrived, she found the doors unlocked, music playing loudly, and Branson's beloved pet unfed. She thought this was strange, but having raised 9 kids, she understood that 20-year-olds sometimes do unusual things. On Saturday afternoon, Joanne returned to the house, hoping to find Branson there waiting for her. Instead, she was met with an unsettling stillness. Everything was just as she had left it. Branson did not return home at all. A wave of concern washed over her, prompting her to reach out to some of Branson's close friends to see if they knew anything about his whereabouts. Unfortunately, they were equally in the dark. Not only did they have no idea where he might be, but they all also revealed that it had been several days since any of them had heard from him. The situation weighed heavily on Joanne's mind. Meanwhile, on Sunday, Bob was finally discharged from the hospital, and he called Branson's mother, Becky. During their conversation, he shared his worries about the lack of contact from Branson and expressed that he hadn't heard from him in days. Reflecting the same concern, Becky admitted that she had not received any messages or calls from her son. Branson was becoming increasingly difficult to reach, raising alarms for his family and friends. Branson was free to come and go as he pleased, but his sudden lack of contact was entirely out of character. This unusual behavior caused increasing concern among his loved ones. The following day, Bob, Joanne, and Becky convened at the local police station to formally report Branson missing. It was April 16th, 3 days since his family had first realized his absence. However, the investigation revealed a more alarming truth. Branson had actually vanished 5 days prior, on Wednesday, April 11th. On that day, Branson had invited a friend named Gina over to his home, marking that the last time anyone had interacted with him. Branson was determined to clean the house meticulously from top to bottom. He wanted to ensure that when Bob returned home from his hospital stay, he wouldn't have to worry about anything related to the house. As he moved through the rooms, faking enthusiasm to distract himself from the underlying stress, Gina watched him closely. At one point, she noticed him open a kitchen cabinet, retrieve a small, nondescript object, and dart out the back door with it with an unreadable expression. With curiosity piqued, Gina followed him with her eyes, wondering what he could possibly be up to. Upon his return, she asked about the item that he had taken, but he simply shrugged off her curiosity without providing a clear answer. It was less of a deliberate refusal and more of a distracted dismissal, as if he had other thoughts occupying his mind. Outside of the house, there were 2 men hunched over Bob's car, which was parked on the street, attempting to fix the alternator. Their tools clattered as they worked diligently, oblivious to the tension building inside the house. It's possible that Branson simply delivered something to them without informing Gina about it, as explaining could take longer than the matter was worth. However, even small details can seem like potential clues when someone goes missing. After cleaning the house for a little while longer, Gina decided to take a shower. When she stepped out of the bathroom, she noticed one of the men who had been working on the car earlier now standing in the kitchen, rummaging through the cabinets as if searching for something specific. Curiously, she approached him and asked what he was looking for. He simply replied that he wasn't searching for anything in particular before leaving the kitchen and returning outside to continue working on the car. This incident marked the second time that someone had gone into those cabinets since Gina was there. She asked what it was about and was dismissed without any explanation. It raised a troubling question. What was in those cabinets that prompted such secrecy? Later on, around 3 p.m., as Gina was upstairs, she heard the unmistakable sound of the porch door closing, cutting through the quiet of the house. She gazed out the window and spotted Branson in the yard. She called out to him, asking what he was doing. He casually responded that he was simply returning the jumper cables to the shed where they were typically stored after use. However, some reports suggest that he also mentioned needing to take care of another matter and told her that he'd be right back. On the other hand, other accounts focus solely on the jumper cables, neglecting any mention of his other errand. Branson's mother, Becky, expressed her frustration and confusion, revealing that she received varying stories about the events of that day from different sources. Given these inconsistencies, it's no wonder that they made their way into the media coverage. Meanwhile, Gina mentioned that after completing her chores inside the house, she waited for Branson to come home, expecting him to be back shortly. When he didn't, she assumed that he had become preoccupied with something else and decided to leave, thinking nothing of it. The two men, who were busy working on the car in the front of the house, claimed that they didn't see anything unusual. They're working on the quiet street of a small town, making it seem strange that neither of them noticed Branson strolling by or heard him getting into a vehicle. It's worth considering, though, that their attention was entirely focused on Bob's car, with tools spread out all around them and the sound of their own work perhaps drowning out any external noises. In the midst of their tasks, it's entirely possible that Branson passed by them without them even realizing. According to the family, all of Branson's personal belongings remained in the house, offering little indication of where he might have gone. Because of this, it suggests that he had left voluntarily and didn't expect to be away for an extended period of time. Even his wallet was found untouched at home. A thorough search of the shed next to his property revealed that the jumper cables were missing, implying that Branson may have disappeared after walking only a few feet from his home to the shed. Organized search efforts began on Tuesday, April 17th, initially focusing on the Perry property and gradually extending to surrounding areas. Volunteers and search teams combed the nearby fields and wooded regions, hoping to find any sign of Branson. Investigators faced significant challenges as they began the official search 6 days after Branson was last seen. The time that had elapsed had diminished the viability of leads, and adverse weather conditions throughout the week further complicated the situation. As a result, it was decided that deploying scent dogs would not be effective, so they were not included in the search efforts. In an attempt to leave no stone unturned, search teams meticulously scoured a variety of abandoned structures. Their efforts included carefully examining old barns, dilapidated farmhouses, and even an empty school, hoping that one of these locations might hold a clue to Branson's whereabouts. Each location was searched thoroughly, but no evidence had been uncovered to explain his sudden disappearance. If any evidence was found during these searches, it has not been made public. An alert was placed on Branson's bank account, which he had only recently opened, but there was no activity. The investigation relied on witness statements as no significant clues or forensic evidence existed. One of the key statements came from Bob Perry, Branson's father. Before I share what he said, I want to clarify something. This story has been repeated in several sources, nearly identical each time, which makes me believe that everyone is pulling from a single source. In many cases, they seem to simply copy and paste the information. The source is Diane Fanning's true crime book, Baby Be Mine, which covers the other case that we'll be covering next. The book includes a section dedicated to Branson, where an important statement is mentioned. The story goes that on April 7th, shortly before he went missing, Branson visited the home of a neighbor named Jason. Jason was about 10 years older than Branson. During his visit, Branson took a drug but was unsure of its identity. Supposedly while high, Branson stripped down naked, danced around, shaved his pubic hair, and then engaged in sexual activity with Jason. Branson went home afterward and told his father what had happened. He was very upset about it. Bob had suspected that Branson was gay already, and that was not the issue for him. However, as we know, intoxicated consent is not truly consent. Trigger warning. Both Branson and Bob believed that the older neighbor had purposely given Branson something in order to rape him. Bob seriously contemplated visiting Jason's house to confront him about the troubling incident involving Branson. However, after weighing his options, he chose not to go through with it. Living in a tight-knit Midwestern town where the fear of homophobia loomed large, Bob was acutely aware of the risks. This pervasive anxiety likely played a significant role in both his and Branson's decision to remain silent about the event leading up to Branson's mysterious disappearance. Let's take a moment to revisit my clarification disclaimer. I currently have just one source for this story, which is attributed to Bob. Although I find it hard to believe that Diane Fanning would fabricate such information, it is essential to highlight when details are derived from a single source. This practice remains vital to maintain transparency, even when I have confidence in that source's reliability. According to Fanning, Bob believed that Branson might have hitchhiked to stay with a close friend who lived in Kansas City, which is about an hour and a half away from Skidmore. Given that Branson was upset, it was possible, but he didn't have a vehicle and would have needed to hitchhike to get there. However, the rest of the family did not think that Branson was the type to hitchhike. As far as they knew, he had never done so before. Nevertheless, when someone goes missing, every lead is worth following. They contacted the friend in Kansas City, but he hadn't heard from Branson. Some wondered if Jason was involved in making Branson quiet about what happened. However, as far as I can tell, he was investigated and cleared of any suspicion. A promising lead emerged from Gina's statement. She revealed that Branson had started to associate with local drug dealers, engaging not only in drug use, but also participating in the supply chain by providing essential raw materials for methamphetamine production. This situation highlights the profound impact that meth can have on rural communities, where the lack of resources and limited opportunities can foster an environment conducive to drug trafficking and abuse. Job opportunities in many areas are often scarce, particularly in small towns where economic prospects are limited. In such environments, illicit activities can become a common means of survival, and drugs, in particular, can offer a way to generate income when legitimate employment is hard to find. Branson, facing the challenges of unemployment after being laid off, may have resorted to associating in the manufacturing of methamphetamine as a desperate attempt to secure some financial stability.
Does your furry friend deserve the best? Of course they do. That's why there's Box Dog, a seasonal box of premium products designed just for your pooch. With Box Dog, you can spoil your pet with a fun and exciting selection of high-quality items. From gourmet treats and chew toys to comfy apparel and unique accessories, Box Dog has it all. Each box is packed with hand-selected products guaranteed to wag tails and bring joy. But Box Dog isn't just about products. It's about providing a personalized experience for your pet. You can customize each box to suit your dog's specific needs and preferences, ensuring they get what they love every time. And the best part? BoxDog delivers straight to your door, making it a convenient and hassle-free way to keep your pet pampered. So why wait? Treat your dog to the luxury they deserve with BoxDog, because every dog deserves a box full of happiness. Order your BoxDog today. Go to boxdog.pxf.io/ccpod. That's boxdog.pxf.io/ccpod.
The nearest metropolitan area to Skidmore, where the majority of these drugs were sold, is St. Joseph, Missouri. This city has been significantly impacted by the methamphetamine epidemic, which has detrimental effects on the community, including increased crime rates, health crisis, and social instability. If you do a Google search for meth in St. Joseph, Missouri, it will reveal numerous articles and reports highlighting the severity of the situation. The reality is alarming, illustrating a community grappling with the far-reaching ramifications of drug addiction and trafficking. In their investigation into Branson's disappearance, authorities in St. Joseph tapped into local drug connections and consulted informants, conducting interviews with several individuals connected to the underground scene. Through these inquiries, the police developed a strong belief that Branson's fate was intricately linked to drug-related activities. However, they have chosen to keep the specifics of this connection confidential, which has led to much speculation in the community. 2 weeks after Branson vanished, an unexpected, perplexing piece of evidence emerged. The jumper cables, previously unaccounted for during the initial search of the shed, were discovered resting just inside the entrance. They were positioned in plain sight, not concealed or hidden, yet their presence raised questions about how they could have been overlooked during the first investigation. This baffling find deepened the mystery surrounding Branson's disappearance and added another layer of complexity to the ongoing investigation. It remains uncertain from available reports when someone last entered the shed, raising questions about how long the jumper cables were kept there. We cannot determine whether they were placed in the shed just moments before their discovery, or if they had been neglected there for several days. According to the family's understanding, the cables were not subjected to fingerprint analysis. The material from which the cables were made of is not conducive for retaining fingerprints. Even if a partial print had been located, the cables had been handled by numerous individuals, making it highly unlikely that any resulting evidence would be meaningful. The most pressing question surrounding the jumper cables is their intended purpose. Why were they returned to the shed in the first place? What could have prompted someone to take the considerable risk of being seen on the property while carrying them? If there was a genuine fear of being caught, why not simply dispose of them in the river or some other remote location? What could possibly justify the decision to return them to the shed instead of eliminating the evidence altogether? As a risk for a kidnapper or a murderer to take, it doesn't make sense. 4 months after Branson's mysterious disappearance, the sheriff spoke with the St. Joseph News Press, revealing that investigators had identified the individuals Branson was last seen with. However, he expressed frustration over the lack of cooperation from these individuals. He indicated that they were Branson's friends, but suspected that their silence stemmed from their involvement in something illegal that may have contributed to his disappearance. This reluctance severely hindered the investigation, as every lead seemed to stall due to their unwillingness to share information. On top of that, an ongoing rumor began circulating within the community, suggesting that Branson was at another residence in Skidmore after being last seen by Gina. If this rumor holds any truth, it could connect the group the police are investigating. As time progressed, 9 months after Branson vanished, the Missouri State Highway Patrol publicly acknowledged that they and the other law enforcement agencies involved in the case had reached an impasse with no substantial leads to pursue. The growing uncertainty surrounding Branson's fate has left investigators and his family in a state of distress, desperate for answers. A year after Branson's mysterious disappearance, his family sought the assistance of Missouri psychic Joyce Morgan. It's essential to note that it was primarily Bob and Joanne who made contact with her, given that Becky was not on board with their decision. In fact, Becky harbored doubts about Joyce's intentions, believing that she was merely looking to profit from their tragedy and gain public attention. In contrast, Joyce reportedly offered her services without charge, claiming a genuine desire to help the family find closure. During her consultation, Joyce made startling assertions, stating that Branson had been killed on the same day he vanished. She provided the police with vivid details about the circumstances surrounding his death, including insights into who she believed was responsible for the crime. Additionally, she confidently predicted that Branson's body would be discovered in the near future. However, as time continued to pass, now stretching to 24 years since his disappearance, it seems that her prediction has not come to fruition, leading many to question the accuracy of her insights. Joanne explained that they had solicited the help of a psychic simply because they felt that they had exhausted all other options and were growing increasingly desperate for answers. Meanwhile, Becky was primarily focused on the idea of providing a monetary reward. The law enforcement officials were convinced that the events surrounding Branson's disappearance unfolded in Skidmore and that several individuals were aware of crucial details. In her pursuit for the truth, Becky was determined to coax one of these potential witnesses into revealing what they knew. She believed that offering a financial incentive would be the most effective approach, if a sense of guilt or moral obligation wasn't enough to prompt someone to come forward. In that case, the allure of a substantial cash reward, potentially amounting to several $1,000s, might finally compel them to speak out. Becky had been diligently pursuing her education in IT, attending classes, and investing countless hours into her studies. To support herself during this endeavor, she worked as a waitress. Over time, she saved a substantial amount of money, setting her sights on a long-awaited vacation, a well-deserved getaway to relax and recharge after the intense grind of balancing work and school. However, when Branson mysteriously disappeared, Becky made a decision that any loving mother would. Instead of using her hard-earned savings for the vacation that she had dreamed of, she redirected all of those funds toward a reward for information on Branson. By the time she had depleted her life savings and the funds generated through various community fundraisers, she had successfully established a $5,000 reward for information regarding the case. Unfortunately, despite this significant incentive, no one came forward with the crucial information needed to solve the mystery surrounding Branson's disappearance. In a notable turn of events, in April 2003, 2 years after Branson vanished, a suspect emerged. This individual was intriguing because he was not connected to the notorious Skidmore drug scene, which had been at the center of the earlier investigations. To fully understand how this suspect came to be on police radar, we need to take a step back in time. This journey will require us to retrace our steps, but I assure you it will all come together in the end. It began in January 2001, when the FBI launched Operation Candyman, an extensive investigation targeting online child pornography. This initiative aimed to uncover individuals involved in disturbing and consuming illicit content on the internet, ultimately revealing a complex web of criminal activities that would intersect with the ongoing investigation into Branson's case. The investigation uncovered a network that ensnared numerous individuals, including Michael Davidson. Authorities found a substantial collection of disturbing images on his computer, evidence potent enough to guarantee him a lengthy prison sentence. In addition to this alarming material, investigators also discovered graphic online chat logs in which Davidson communicated with other predators, revealing the dark underbelly of his interactions. Among these individuals was Jack Wayne Rogers, a man who was trusted as both a minister and a Boy Scout leader in Fulton, Missouri, a town approximately 4 hours from Skidmore. The juxtaposition of his respectable roles with his participation in vile online conversations about pedophilia and sexual violence is deeply unsettling. In an alarming account, Rogers recanted a chilling incident in which he picked up a blonde-haired hitchhiker from Skidmore. He described in graphic detail the horrifying actions he took against the young man, which ultimately led to the boy's death. The details concerning the young man he had picked up were alarmingly consistent with Branson Perry's physical description, including his height, build, and distinctive features. Additionally, the circumstances surrounding the encounter and the timeline coincided eerily with the events leading up to Branson's disappearance. A thorough investigation of Rogers' home and office revealed a shocking array of graphic and disturbing images that no one should ever have to witness. These discoveries raised serious concerns about Rogers' involvement in Branson's case and painted a chilling picture of his character. It was revealed that this was not his first offense. In 1992, he pleaded guilty to the offense of receiving child pornography through the mail, resulting in a 4-month jail sentence. Following his release, the start of the internet dramatically changed the landscape of illicit material accessibility. With this new technology, he found himself with even greater opportunities to obtain such content online, significantly expanding his access and increasing his ability to get it online without detection. Before we continue, I just want to give you guys a heads up about what we're going to be covering. While this episode has been difficult, I must address some details about violence against trans women that cannot be overlooked. In addition to the child pornography, there were photographs of Rogers posing with severed male genitalia. The investigation revealed a horrifying reality. Rogers was conducting illegal gender confirmation surgeries in makeshift hotel room clinics, preying on the desperation of trans women grappling with profound gender dysphoria. As one investigator described, these procedures were not medical interventions. They were unqualified and unlicensed butcher jobs. Rogers displayed a shocking disregard for the health and well-being of the women involved. There was no attempt at reconstruction, no concern for long-term care, only crude, often dangerous removal procedures. The emotional toll on these women was immense, compounded by the complex nature of their consent. One woman bravely spoke at Rogers' eventual sentencing on a range of charges and articulated this complexity with striking clarity. Initially, she didn't perceive herself as a traditional victim. She had, after all, consented to the surgery. However, the revelation of Rogers' actions shattered this perception. She learned that Rogers had callously posed for photographs with the severed tissue, treating the women's bodies as objects of grotesque fascination. This wasn't a misguided attempt to assist the trans community, as some might have initially speculated. It was a calculated act of exploitation, a demonstration of utter contempt for the women he claimed to help. This woman's testimony highlighted the insidious nature of Rogers' actions. He didn't just perform dangerous procedures, he violated the trust of vulnerable individuals, exploiting their desperation for affirmation and their need for gender-affirming care. He stripped away their dignity, not only through the procedures themselves, but also through his callous treatment of their bodies. The woman's experience highlighted the fact that consent, while essential, doesn't negate the potential for exploitation, especially when power dynamics are so deeply skewed and the promise of relief is so desperately sought.
Hey, crime connoisseurs. If you're like me, you love diving into a good book. I especially love finding a book about cases we cover. But sometimes it's hard to find the time to sit and read. We live in an on-the-go society. Thankfully, Audible makes it easy to instantly access the books we love without sacrificing our time. With over 180,000 audiobooks and more, you will undoubtedly find one that will grip you and leave you not wanting to pull away while still being able to do other things. You can get a free 30-day trial membership by going to audibletrial.com/ccpod to start listening to your favorite books. That's audibletrial.com/ccpod for your free 30-day trial membership.
The investigation into Rogers' activities revealed a deeply disturbing pattern. Chat logs and photographs suggested he was mutilating individuals for his own sexual gratification, treating them as objects for his perverse desires. This pattern extended beyond the women he operated on, as his alleged interactions with Branson Perry in the chat logs also hinted to a similar form of mutilation. However, when confirmed with this evidence, Rogers vehemently denied any involvement in Branson's disappearance. He claimed that the chat logs were pure fantasy, a product of his imagination. He insisted he had never met Branson, never picked him up, and that his knowledge of the case stemmed solely from a missing persons flyer. He portrayed himself as merely filling in the blanks with his twisted mind, creating a fictional narrative. Despite the graphic content of the chat logs, investigators were unable to charge Rogers with Branson's disappearance or murder. The lack of corroborating physical evidence rendered the chat logs inadmissible as a confession. There was no body, no crime scene, nothing to connect Rogers to Branson beyond his own words. A potential lead emerged with the discovery of a necklace in Rogers' possession. Bob Perry, Branson's father, identified it as resembling one of Branson's own, a turtle's claw pendant. However, DNA testing yielded no results. Crucially, there were no photographs of Branson wearing the necklace, making it impossible to definitively prove that it was his. Becky acknowledged that Branson owned a lot of jewelry in that style, but couldn't recall that specific piece. Bob Perry was also not present the day that Branson disappeared, so he could not confirm what jewelry Branson was wearing that day. It's important to emphasize that while the necklace identification is noteworthy, it was far from a smoking gun, as it is sometimes portrayed in discussions of this case. The lack of definitive proof left investigators with frustrating limitations. When Rogers was charged and pleaded guilty to the other offenses, Becky attended every court date, hoping for a breakthrough, some piece of information that would shed light on her son's disappearance. However, that day never came. Over time, Becky's perspective evolved. She eventually came to believe that Rogers had no involvement in Branson's disappearance and that he had indeed constructed a sick fantasy about him after seeing the missing persons flyer. This shift in her belief highlights the complex emotional journey of families dealing with unsolved disappearances and the struggle to reconcile disturbing circumstantial evidence with the lack of concrete proof. Jack Wayne Rogers is currently in federal prison. His sentencing brought closure to the cases against him, though the full extent of his actions may never be known. He is currently serving a lengthy sentence and will not be eligible for release until 2028 at the earliest. Given his age, 80 at the time of this recording, there's a possibility he might not survive to his release date. Adding to the disturbing picture of Rogers' character, in 2014, a former teenager, who is now a Presbyterian minister, came forward with allegations of sexual abuse. He stated that Rogers assaulted him in 2000 when he was a teenager. At the time, Rogers was serving as a chaperone on a youth trip to a national conference in Maryland. This revelation is particularly alarming as it occurred only 8 years after Rogers had pleaded guilty to child pornography charges. The fact that he was allowed to chaperone a youth trip after such a conviction raises serious questions about the oversight and judgment of those responsible. Rogers likely has additional victims who have not yet come forward. His history and patterns of behavior strongly suggest a broader scope of abuse. However, despite the suspicion surrounding Rogers, it's increasingly believed that Branson Perry was not among his victims. While Rogers' presence and his disturbing actions offer a convenient explanation for some in the Skidmore community, who might find it easier to believe an outsider was responsible, law enforcement's working theory points to a different conclusion. The police strongly suspect that someone within the Skidmore community is responsible for Branson's disappearance. While difficult to accept for some, this theory is based on their investigative findings and the lack of concrete evidence linking Rogers to Branson. It's a somber reminder that sometimes the most unsettling truths lie closest to home. Over the years, the Sheriff's Department continued to pursue leads in Branson Perry's disappearance, utilizing various investigative techniques. One approach involved questioning individuals arrested for other offenses, such as drug-related crimes, hoping to glean information about Branson's fate. The Sheriff's Department developed a strong theory about what transpired through this process. According to their findings, Branson Perry had recently begun experimenting with drugs, a detail corroborated by Gina's statement. Also, Branson was reportedly involved in procuring supplies for methamphetamine production. This involvement placed him in a potentially dangerous and volatile environment. Adding another layer of complexity to the investigation was Branson's reported interaction with a local police officer. The details of this encounter remain undisclosed, but it reportedly caused concern among some individuals who feared Branson might divulge information to avoid facing potential charges. Based on their investigative efforts, the Sheriff's Department believes that there were 9 key individuals involved in Branson's disappearance. They have not released the names of these individuals, but their assertion indicates a belief that Branson's disappearance was not a result of a random act, but rather a planned event involving a specific group. The search for Branson Perry has been a long and difficult journey, marked by numerous leads, dead ends, and the persistent hope for closure. Over the years, the Sheriff's Department has pursued countless tips, ranging from phone calls to anonymous leads, resulting in periodic searches and digs across a wide area from Burlington Junction to Quitman. The case's first lead investigator was Steve Whittington, who served as a sergeant and an investigator with the Nottoway County Sheriff's Office from 1997 to 2010. Whittington recalled extensive search efforts in the initial year following Branson's disappearance. During that first year after Branson disappeared, Whittington said that he recalled digging up a septic tank in Holt County, an area north of Skidmore, a spot in Quitman, and that they searched as many wells as they could find, following up on leads and even the weakest rumors, just in case they could find something that would put them on the trail to Branson. As the investigation progressed, and after conducting over 100 interviews in the first 2 months, law enforcement's focus shifted towards Branson's connections to the drug scene in and around Skidmore and Quitman, a small unincorporated area south of Skidmore. Specifically, they concentrated on witness statements placing Branson at a home east of Quitman after he left his home in Skidmore. Whittington told the Forum, quote, "I'm sure this is all tied to drugs. After more than 2 decades, most serious theories about what happened to Branson Perry involve people he knew through drugs," end quote. Darren White, a Nottoway County Sheriff's deputy in 2001 and later sheriff from 2009 to 2017, told the Forum, quote, "I can tell you that there were a lot of people that were involved in the drug community, involved in selling, and there were a whole bunch of them that they were all familiar with each other," end quote. A particular house on a gravel road east of Quitman repeatedly surfaced in rumors and anonymous tips as a hub for drug activity. White confirmed that witnesses placed Branson at this house after he left his home. He also recounted his experience as a deputy on duty when the house burned down. White admitted that when he wasn't entirely certain about the exact sequence of events, and neither was Whittington. However, he was confident about one crucial detail. When the house burned down, Branson had not yet been reported missing. According to White's best recollection, the fire occurred sometime within the 5-day window between the last time Gina saw Branson at his home on Wednesday the 11th and when Branson's family reported him missing on Monday the 16th. He speculated that the fire most likely happened on either Friday or Saturday night. White said, quote, "There was a lot of activity that went on out there, but by the time of the fire, they had all abandoned the place, and this was, in retrospect, after Branson went missing, but before that was reported," end quote. On that Friday or Saturday night, White said that he responded to the fire at the house. Quote, "By the time that we got the call and got there, there was absolutely nothing left. It had burned to the ground," end quote. White believes the house is central to Branson's disappearance, saying, quote, "The best theory is that the house is where he was actually murdered. That's the best theory, that he was murdered in that house, and that ultimately, of course, when the house was destroyed by fire, any possible evidence that might have been there would have been destroyed in the fire," end quote. Nottoway County Sheriff Randy Strong also confirmed that Branson was last seen at a residence that burned down days later. Strong confirmed to the Forum that he was referring to a house in Quitman based on evidence gathered before he became sheriff. He said he did not want to share more for fear of putting someone in danger due to the explicitness of the information. Despite the focus on the burned-down house, investigators acknowledge that this does not solve the crime. The investigation has been hampered by the lack of concrete evidence. White said, quote, "There was just a lot of little pieces of information, but not enough to put everything together," end quote. As former sheriff, White recounted to the Forum, saying, quote, "There were a lot of tips, and how do you determine what's credible and what's not credible? But they took everything pretty serious, and there were a lot of people that spent a lot of time looking in wells and ponds and just all kinds of places in several counties. It never went anywhere," end quote. Despite the lack of conclusive results, law enforcement remained committed to investigating any and all potential leads. White said, quote, "One time it was reported that he was put in a barrel and they threw him in the river. And there was a report that he was buried and then dug up and then reburied multiple times. And then at one point, there was a report that he was buried under a bridge and nothing ever came of that. So, here we are all these years later, and it's pretty frustrating," end quote. A particularly notable incident occurred in 2009 during White's tenure as sheriff. Acting on a tip from a prisoner in Holt County who claimed to have been present when Branson Perry was buried, the sheriff's office conducted a 2-day excavation of a well in Quitman. White told the forum, quote, "And we dug. Oh boy, did we dig. We dug deep and never found anything then. And then later on, he recanted and said that he really didn't know and that he just saw it as an opportunity to get out of jail for a while. But there again, you get these tips and you can't just ignore them," end quote. The subsequent excavation was a substantial undertaking, spanning 2 days and involving the digging of a 23-foot deep hole. This excavation covered a considerable area, measuring approximately 20 feet by 40 feet, indicating a thorough and extensive search effort. Adding another layer to the history of the investigation, a local farmer residing 1.5 miles east of Quitman recalled a previous search of his property. Several years prior to the 2009 excavation, law enforcement had conducted a search on his land, specifically looking for an abandoned well. This earlier search, however, had not yielded any results, highlighting the persistent and varied efforts undertaken to locate Branson. This incident highlights the difficult balance between pursuing every lead and dealing with the inherent unreliability of some information. The following year, in 2010, Branson's mother, Becky, demonstrated her unwavering determination by offering a $20,000 reward. This financial incentive was aimed at encouraging individuals with potential information about her son's whereabouts to come forward, highlighting the family's continued hope and active pursuit for answers. The passage of time has added another layer of sorrow to the case. With each passing year, fewer individuals remain who might possess vital information. Tragically, Branson Perry's closest family members have also passed away. His father, Bob, died in 2004. In February 2011, Becky passed away after a prolonged struggle with melanoma. Her death marked a poignant moment in the ongoing search for Branson. Joanne reflected on the community's efforts, saying, quote, "Around town, we searched every oil well, every outside toilet. We searched everywhere that was possible for us to think that something could be there," end quote. This statement encapsulated the exhaustive and widespread nature of the local search efforts in the years following Branson's disappearance. Monica Kaysen, the founder of Q Center for Missing Persons and a close friend of Becky's, emphasized the enduring commitment to finding Branson. She revealed that she and other close friends had made a solemn promise to Becky to continue the search for her son. This promise reflected the deep personal involvement and the sense of responsibility felt by those close to the family. Becky's obituary solemnly noted that she was preceded in death by her son Branson. This acknowledgement in her obituary served as a stark reminder of the enduring loss and the unresolved nature of Branson's disappearance. Becky was buried beside an empty plot reserved for Branson. This plot was marked with his date of death as April 11, 2001, the very day he vanished. This symbolic gesture highlights the family's enduring hope for his return or discovery of his remains and the profound impact his disappearance had on their lives. 4 years later, in 2015, the community mourned the loss of another link to Branson's disappearance, his grandmother, Joanne Stinnett. Joanne had been a pillar of strength and a constant presence in the search for her grandson. Her words, recalling the exhaustive searches, painted a vivid picture of a community united in their efforts. Her passing marked the loss of someone who held Branson close in her heart and dedicated years to trying to bring him home. Darren White said, quote, "The sad part is that his mother and his grandmother have both passed. So I guess in some way they're now with him, and so they do have their final answer for people that are of faith. But while they were both living, they really devoted a lot of time to trying to get some answers and some resolution. But it just never happened," end quote. After the 2009 dig, the investigation faced a period of relative quiet, with few significant developments until 2022. At that time, Sheriff Strong revealed to the news press that his agency had identified a suspect, but lacked the crucial evidence, namely Branson's body, to bring charges. The case was reignited once again when the sheriff's office, acting on a credible tip, conducted a week-long stakeout and search of another well in Quitman. The FBI was brought in to assist, but ultimately this lead also proved fruitless. Captain Austin Hahn of the sheriff's office stated, quote, "This is still an open case, so the investigation portion of this never really stops for us. We are still going to take every single tip in. We are going to follow up on every single tip that's provided. And if we believe that that tip is credible, we are going to pour resources into following up," end quote. The investigation into Branson Perry's disappearance remains open, a testament to the enduring commitment of law enforcement to finding answers despite the daunting challenges and the passage of time. Hopefully, one day, investigators can end their search and bring the family the answers they need. And that's the case of Wendy Gillenwater and Branson Perry. But we still have one more case to cover that has plagued this family, and it's one that is an absolute heartbreaker. Come back next week for the final part of Skidmore, a town of shadows and secrets. You can find Crime Connoisseurs wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Be sure to follow us on social media at Crime Connoisseurs for updates and bonus content. As always, thank you all so much for listening. In the meantime, keep it classy, connoisseurs, and I'll catch you on the next case.
Are you tired of settling for subpar cat food? It's time to upgrade your cat's dining experience with Smalls, the ultimate gourmet meal for your feline companion. Say goodbye to generic one-size-fits-all cat food. With Smalls, you can rest assured that your furry friend is getting the nutrition they deserve. Join the thousands of cat owners who have made the switch to Smalls and see the difference it can make in your cat's health and happiness. Treat your cat to the finest dining experience with Smalls. Visit smalls.sjv.io/ccpod now to order your first box. That's smalls.sjv.io/ccpod. Choose Smalls because your cat deserves the best.